Good to start. I think we're good to start. A few minutes early only just, but good evening everyone. I want to remind councillors that this is a public meeting, so please be mindful of your actions and your comments. You should avoid making statements that might defame or offend, and note that a recording of this meeting will be retained online and in council's archives. Please turn your mobile phones off or switch to silence. Filming and photography are not permitted in the meeting. Anyone observed to be filming the meeting may be asked to leave. I now declare the meeting open at 7:07. Councillor Lamont, who is not online presently, has requested to join the meeting remotely as an observer. Therefore, I move the following procedural motion: that the committee approves the request by Councillor Lamont to dial into the Governance and Finance Committee meeting on the 13th of May at 7 p.m. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor McNamara.
I think it's got to be a member.
Councillor McGregor as the seconder. I now put the motion. All those in favour of voting of the motion. Actually, before I do that, we've also got Councillor Eaton, who sent a last-minute request to dial into the meeting due to health reasons, and that's been circulated with civic support and the relevant staff. So I might move both of those together. Councillor McGregor as the seconder. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Keep it raised. Unanimous. Thank you. Well, firstly, a warm welcome to everyone in attendance and those watching along at home tonight. I'm sure there's a cast of thousands. Obviously very exciting. This is our first meeting of the Governance and Finance Committee meeting. It is a quarterly meeting, which is going to align with the meeting just before the quarterly review meets the council. So we'll have the opportunity to hear from the director and the relevant staff about the quarterly review before that time. It'll then go to the corresponding council meeting. I think this is very exciting, actually, as a committee. You know, it's something I've long advocated for on council ever since I arrived in the chamber. As you all know, it's something I'm very passionate about. I think it's something I want to make quite collaborative as well. I know we all come from different backgrounds. We all represent the same community, but you know, we all share a range of perspectives. I think that's important. We're obviously all located on different parts of the Central Coast as well, so it's important that we're representing all of those effectively. So hopefully, in this committee meeting over the next 3 or 4 years, we can propose some great ideas that not only make our financial sustainability better, but also deliver better value for money for ratepayers, because as you all would agree, I believe that's very important. To acknowledge the country, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we live, work and play. We pay our respects to Dark and Young Country and elders past and present. We recognise the continued connection to these lands and waterways and extend this acknowledgement to the homelands and stories of those who also call this place home. We recognise our future leaders and the shared responsibility to take care and protect our place and our people. Apologies. I did have a last-minute apology from Councillor John Moreland, who said he's unfortunately had to leave. So just note that.
From Councillor Castles.
From Councillor Castles as well, please. Are there any further apologies that anyone's aware of? I now ask committee members to disclose any conflicts of interest they may have in terms of tonight's agenda. Firstly, myself, I confirm that I do not have any conflicts of interest to declare on this paper. Councillor Crowley? No. Councillor Eaton? Any conflicts to declare?
No conflict.
Thank you. And Councillor McGregor?
No conflict.
Thank you all. So the committee intends to deal with multiple items on the business paper on the agenda together by way of a single resolution. I will now call the number and title of each item and ask members to indicate if they wish for the item to be discussed and debated. Firstly, item 1.3 is the Q3 operational plan. I'm happy to agree that we speak to that, as I know Councillor McGregor is as well. Secondly, item 1.4, reviewed code of conduct. Does anyone wish to have that matter discussed tonight? Okay. Item 1.5, the draft code of meeting practice for public exhibition. Anyone wish to speak to that this evening? Thank you. The draft public forum policy, my apologies, item 1.6. Does anyone wish to speak to that this evening? That is also going on public exhibition, I should note. Item 1.7, draft councillor expenses and facilities policy. I wish to speak to that this evening.
Yeah, so I just want to ask a question or make a suggestion anyhow.
Noted. Thank you, councillor Eaton. Item 1.8, viewed investments management policy and draft borrowings policy for adoption. Wish to speak to that this evening? Item 1.9, reviewed procurement policy. Noting that's for adoption. Does anyone wish to speak to that this evening?
Yes, again, I had a couple of questions on that.
Item 1.10, North of Oka Surf Life
So,
Saving
sorry,
Club.
did you hear that? 1.1?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Item 1.10, North of Oka Surf Life Saving Club, the approval to issue a lease and licence. Does anyone wish to speak to that?
Questions?
Questions? Sure. Okay. For that exemption procedural motion, do I have a motion?
I'll do that way.
Yes.
Moved by Councillor McGregor, seconded by Councillor Eaton. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour, raise your hand and keep it raised. Unanimous. For the Q3 March 2025 operations plan and budget review, item 1.3, I now invite Director Marissa Rakamalera, Director of Corporate Services, to speak to the report.
Thank you, Councillor. Welcome everyone to this first committee. Tonight we're looking at the quarterly 3 report. This is an interim report. We're not expecting major changes, but just noting that the full council will receive a briefing on this next week. And then it will be presented to the council as a separate report for adoption. So that's because that's how we present all of our performance management and financial reports, always go separate to the council rather than as part of the minutes. But this is the appropriate committee to consider it in detail. Tonight, we do have 2 speakers on the 2 components of the report. Our quarterly reports are mandated and legislated, and the content of those are legislated as well, and provided in the IPNR guidelines. But there's a full report there, and what I might do is hand directly over to Nicole Jenkins to kick us off. And I believe Civic Support, have you got the presentation? Thank you.
Through the chair. Yeah. Through the chair, committee members. I know the focus in the report structure is a lot around the financials, but those financials really contribute to the outcomes being delivered to the community. So we did want to start with talking about those outcomes, and this Q3 report is very important. It indicates where we're tracking at and any likelihood of any actions or commitments not being met, and what measures staff are taking to mitigate those risks. So as you have seen from the report, just bring that. As you have seen from the report, we have had a number of actions already completed at 14 and 7 actions closed. And some of you may recall from the previous council's report where we've closed off actions. That has to be endorsed by council. We provided explanation for those. Generally, it's relating to projects that we had proposed to do that maybe another government agency started work on doing, so it's appropriate to close. And 5 actions were closed last quarter, rolled up into 1. If you want to recall that. So that's what those actions closed refer to, and we have 14 completed. Pleasingly, we have 69% or 74 actions on track. And if you did have the opportunity to read through the report, pleasingly, some of our KPIs are on track to be exceeded. We do, however, have 11 projects that are delayed, and 1 that was actually put on hold, which has recommenced. And I am committed to being transparent, and we'll give a brief update, the chair permits, on those delayed projects. So our under customer marketing, economic development, our response rate for CXs, we've reported at 88.6%. Our target is 90%. I can confirm in our April results, which is not reflected in this report, we're sitting at 89.2%. So there is every chance, and the customer service team have briefed executive and unit managers on actions that need to be taken to ensure we meet that target. So we are working very hard to ensure that KPI is met. Our libraries and education, we did have a target of 1 million visits to library branches, and you will see in the report we're just over 50% of that target. In 1 quarter to go, it is unlikely that we would reach that target. There have been some contributing factors. When we looked at the original target was on the assumption that potentially the new library would have opened earlier. But also looking at consumer behaviour, where people are actually tapping into digital assets. And what we have committed to do in the new operating plan, which is out on exhibition, is reviewing that target to make sure the target's adjusted according to the community behaviour. Any questions on that one? In regards to the library transformation strategy, for the year 1 actions, the majority of those will be completed. One is at risk because we'll be waiting on the timing of the council report. But pleasingly, the majority of those will be completed. In terms of our open space and recreation, our service tracking target is 80%, is 90%. We're tracking at 80%. There is a risk that we won't achieve the 90%, but the team is taking corrective action to get as close to that as possible. We have had machinery being borrowed from other areas and a number of other initiatives to work very hard to reach target. Community satisfaction compliance target was 90%. We're currently sitting at 89.5%, so it is expected that we will achieve that target. Similarly for the last one, community satisfaction, receiving sitting at 91% of scheduled services completed in Q3. We're at 86 year to date, so very high chance that that will be achieved. In terms of development assessment, our year to date 34.8% and for Q3 22.6% is under our 40% target. However, that is being driven by the work we're doing through the backlog, and I'm aware that council has been briefed on the impact of clearing that backlog. So at this point, we're continuing to work through that, and we're very close to achieving that target. Similarly for our gross calendar days, year to date of 138, and for Q3 146. It is not likely that we could meet the target, which was less than 60 days. And again, the contribution of the backlog and those older DAs that are being progressed through, those older than 12 months, is having a direct impact on that target. But we are being very transparent, of course, and we do not expect to reach the target in 1 quarter to go. In terms of strategic planning, our species management plans for squirrel glider and swift parrot, the target was to have that adopted by the 30th of June. While we have the draft species management plan for squirrel glider, and that's going through internal reviews at the moment. We will not meet those targets. We are waiting also on key information from DPHI, and so both of these plans are being delayed. We've also had 2 significant resignations of ecologists, so we will not meet that target date of June 30, but to know one is in internal process at the moment for approvals. In terms of governance and risk, we have a action that council policies are current and accessible by the 30th of June 25, and we have a note here that we are waiting on some further updates to be released from the OLG that would potentially impact, including the release of the model meeting code. Again, we've all been briefed on that in previous workshops. In terms of water and sewer, there are 2 actions that are not on track. One relates to a commitment to have enhancements for website content, and one relates to a delivery program and the water and sewer delivery program. we are working on the website activity as an escalated project in this quarter to ensure that outcome is delivered to the community. The master plan, which is the second activity that was committed, is unlikely to be delivered by the 30th of June. I'm waiting on information from state government. And lastly, my own unit, performance and communication, relating to our service optimisation framework. We had a commitment to undertake a service optimisation initiative relating to town centres. We did have a audit or review of our process, and we had some feedback that was presented to REC. The team have had a look at how we can incorporate that feedback into that project. We've also revised the scope based on community sentiment, and that work has now commenced. It won't be completed in full in quarter 4. It will continue over, but that action is currently on hold at the time of this report and is now not on hold. And that is the on hold and 11 delayed. Happy to take any questions from the chair.
Any question?
On the hub, I don't know if this has come through since I've downloaded this, but it still just says skipping it come through or whatever. So I've actually been able to look at this Q3 one.
As the attachment.
Yeah, there should be a supplementary agenda associated with it. So that's how it was released.
Okay, so because I got the confidential one about the places, but I just didn't see that other one there. So my other question is just comparing it to the Q2. The numbers in the Q2 compared to the Q3 are different from that table there. And I understand it's a different report. What I'm saying is, like, it says 106 for the Q2, but it's 107 on there. And in the different columns, the numbers at the bottom are slightly different. So how do we look back at Q2 to Q3 and do a comparison there, or what's to go with that?
So the difference in the numbers from the 2 quarters should be explained by those items that were actually closed. I think that's the difference there.
It's the total number of is different for each of them. So, and obviously the completed on track or whatever is going to change. But what I'm talking about is the overall number is different for the column. There's 106 as opposed to 107. The 20 is the same. There's 10 to 9. And then 13, 41, 23. So there's 2 of these are out.
Do you believe that's an administrative error, and we can take that
Okay.
correction? Check that.
And then in terms of comparing between the second quarter and the third quarter, how do you do that?
In terms of coming out of the system,
I don't know, just
the numbers or the progress?
in terms of the progress, like, where have we met our targets? Where have we not gone about? Do you report on that in any detail? Because as I said, I haven't read the figures, I haven't got it in front of me, but apart from what you've spoken to tonight, all that information.
So through the chair, we can, for the council report, we can have the comparison from the previous quarter. I don't believe that is currently how we're reporting, but certainly we can do that to show quarter on quarter progress and changes.
That's what I'm interested in. Are we saying we're going to do this? We're meeting that, we're exceeding it, we're coming underneath it. Where's the ability? That would be quite helpful. See if we're actually.
So without the attachment, it'd be very difficult to ascertain that comparison to our targets. Attached report. There is columns. I don't know if any other committee members had trouble accessing it.
So I've seen it. So I got the supplementary agenda.
In the
Yeah, I
actual,
saw it.
in the report, we actually indicate what the target is, then what the current status is, and with a commentary note. So, for example, if the target is to deliver 100 widgets, we're on track, we're producing 8 widgets. There'd be a comment that is proportionate to this time of year. If you recall from last quarter's report, we had commentary around seasonal numbers relating to our leisure centres as an explanation for disproportionate for the time of So in those columns in that report, apologies, councillor, if you don't have access to that, it'd be very difficult
Yeah.
to see.
So I've got it now. Okay, so I found, so my error, I didn't see it beforehand. So what page should I be looking at? Yeah, yes.
Scroll into, we got the actual supplementary.
Yeah, that's the supplementary attachment.
We have the area, the actual activity, the target, what the status is, and then the comment.
Okay, I can read through that now.
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks.
Apologies, councillor.
No, that's fine. I just had to read it before. That's why I was trying to work that out.
Thank you for raising.
Perfect. I might, I can see Councillor Eaton's got his hand up, so I'll go to Councillor Eaton, then if Councillor McGregor has any further questions. No, he can go back. Councillor Eaton?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not sure if this is the right part because I remember the staff saying there was going to do this in two parts. But I'll ask the question now. If you can defer it to the second part if that's more the appropriate. And it's about the significant shortfall in the budget on interest. I think it's like anyhow, it's many millions of dollars from my recollection as to between the budget and the actual.
So
And
we
I'm just
might
looking
cover
for
that when we
explanation
do
of
the finances, and I'm sure when
Okay.
Emma presents, she can cover that point, if that's okay.
Okay,
Councillor.
that's fine. And I did have one other question. I think in this area, there was a comment about the mowing. I think it was the roadside mowing was under target, and some story about equipment that was broken or something like that. Just sort of wanting to check that that's all back on track and everything's going gung ho now. I understand that there's probably some issues too.
Through the chair, so under open space and recreation, the target of 90% of the annual scheduled servicing of roadside vegetation, we're tracking at 80% for the quarter and 81% year to date. There is a risk that we won't achieve the 90% target. However, those mitigating strategies, so machinery being borrowed from Lake Macquarie, new machinery has been ordered, and another number of other initiatives to get as close to that target as possible. But year to date, we're sitting at 81%.
Yeah, I suppose I'm just stressing that I think, this is the appearance of our council area and, it's an important item to be on top of. And that's why I've raised it to, I suppose, stress. And I know councillors have raised it repeatedly. So just reinforcing that this is one we want to get on top of.
Sure. Councillor McNamara.
To Councillor Eaton's point, Chair, is it the committee's role to have a look at that in particular, and from a finance point of view, decide that the targets may not be correct because of the feedback we are getting from the public, and to see what the committee may recommend for increases in machinery, staff, trucks, whatever, to see what options you may have.
For sure. I think, potentially we could have it as an action item just to maybe get a sense of what that 81% looks like, where we can do better, if it's a machinery issue, if it's a staffing issue, if it's a cost issue. Because I know we spoke previously at another meeting about potentially increasing that in next year's budget. So maybe seeing how that is incorporated into it as well, I think would be good, because I know particularly in the last week, there's been some extended commentary on it.
Would you like me to provide some initial feedback?
I'd love you to.
Mr. Chair. So it is an item that we understand the importance to the community. You'll see in the proposed budget adjustments that there's an increase of 200,000 for this year to get us back on track. But also we're reviewing our plant and fleet processes to ensure that we don't end up in this same situation again. Part of the issue has been that certain parts of the machinery have a really long lead time once, if something goes wrong with them. So we're just looking at the balance between investing in spare parts on hand versus ordering them, and the impacts on the community as well as the impacts on the finances. So that will be reflected in next year's budget as well. But there is a proposed budget adjustment, which we'll work through at next week's workshop, increasing the expenditure this financial year to get us back on track. So utilising those processes that Nicole already mentioned.
Supplementary.
Oh, wow.
For, is that continually using internal staff and machinery? Does that budget extend to supplementing the works with contractors at all?
We do use both currently.
And is that in the operational plan under a different section, split out from internal costs to contracting costs or not?
Not for each individual unit. However, I can get that information for you if you would like it. What we do tend to do is we utilise our existing internal resources, whether plant or people, to maximum capacity, and then we top that up with contractors where required. And that balance changes on a regular basis depending on our internal resourcing and the availability of plant. But that budget adjustment is to increase external contracts because our internal staff are at maximum capacity at the moment.
Councillor Herrera.
Just a follow-up with the Q3 budget review on page 38, it's DP 499 regarding the implementation and delivery of year 3 of the water and sewer delivery plan. It says that 2 actions were currently delayed and are linked to a water and sewer master plan. Do you know what those 2 actions are?
Through the chair, one of the actions, so the reference is the two actions that are referenced. It's not clearly linked into there. It is the website. With regards to the master plan, I'm waiting for a release of information from state government.
Okay. And do we have a time frame roughly on when that might be?
So I haven't provided that.
That's all right. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, there being no further questions, I'll put the motion if we have a motion. Someone to raise. Let's do that.
Part 2.
Thank you. And I might just introduce Emma Galea, our Chief Financial Officer, who I'm sure you've all met before.
So essentially the quarterly review, budget review, it's almost like a mini budget process where we do go back and look at our assumptions and how we're going and what we project to happen. Q3 in particular is very, very important because it's the last opportunity to revise the budget to make sure that it's as aligned as possible with where we think that we want to be. So we do look very closely both income and expenditure, both favourable and unfavourable, to make sure that we can take any action in a timely manner. So when we look at the result, it's very important to get it in 2 parts. So there's the result that excludes water and sewer, and that's the actual surplus or projected surplus that council can consider to use or not to use to live there, because obviously the water and sewer surplus can only be used on water and sewer. So when we look at that result, essentially where we are projecting to be is a budgeted operating surplus of 24.5 million. That's where we expect to be. Before the Q3 review, the budget result there was 12.8 million. And essentially the change is made up of 2 things. So there's quite a substantial increase in revenue, predominantly through interest, as Councillor Eaton pointed out. And there's a small increase in operating expenditure. And there's some items in the report that we would highlight. So before I cover the expenditure, in terms of the operating revenue, a big part of, so there's a few things there. So there's some income from higher utilization of our facilities and the leisure facilities. So we increase the income to align with where we expect to be. I will point out that higher level of utilization is already captured in next year's budget. So when we were doing the budget we already took that into account. But that's not to say that obviously in next financial year, there will also be quarterly reviews and we'll adjust further if we need to. But predominantly, the increase relates to interest revenue. So when we do the budget, so we start the budget process pretty much in October, November. So quite a number of months beforehand. And at that time, we do two things. So when it comes to interest, is the cash that we're going to have, we project to have invested is obviously a big part of it. And then trying to estimate the rate of return. So at different points in time, sometimes there's indications interest rates are going up or that they're going down. So there's a lot of assumptions there. But predominantly when we budget for interest, we do form the amount on the assumption that our operation plan is delivered in full. So that means all capital works are completed and fully paid for. So it is a very prudent approach because generally there is always some that is not spent, but that does play a lot of plays a big part in estimating the revenue. The interest rate that we budgeted for was not too different from what we've been earning. However, what also probably has improved from previous years is that we are acting more quickly when there is surplus cash that we can put out in an investment. We're getting onto it quicker. So we did used to tend to leave a lot of cash in the transactional before we invested. So this year we have been investing more as soon as there's a balance there that we feel it's worthwhile investing, doing that a bit more quicker. But also there is about 8 million worth of interest that will happen next financial year, but it's there's part of it attributable to this financial year. So there's quite a large accrued revenue that needs to come in. So when you look at the 15 million adjustment, that incorporates that accounting end of year adjustment as well. We are looking at a process where in future years we try and bring that in a bit earlier so we don't have that big adjustment in Q3. So we're looking at that accrual process at the moment to see how we can capture that in a bit more of a timely fashion.
So are you saying you realised the revenue or it's still on the books?
So we've got some term deposits that the expiry date or the
Maturity date.
Yeah, it falls into next year. But say, for example, some 6 months of that revenue. So we'll get the revenue in next financial year, but say there'll be a number of months where they're attributed to this financial year. So end of financial year, we accrue it back. And that's correct because essentially that income is attributable to that. With term deposits, it's easier to kind of calculate that, but when it comes to floating rate notices, it's a bit more challenging. So that's what we're unpacking because ideally we don't have a big adjustment in the very last quarter. So we are looking at picking that up as much as we can. And obviously with interest, there's also always an element of prudence that we have to apply because if all of a sudden the interest rates fall, then we start seeing that straight away. But that's the reason for the big adjustment. And what we will do, we will be revisiting during the exhibition period of the IPNR. There's a number of decisions, also council decisions that impact that happen after the budget was finalised and out on exhibition. So before we come up in June, we will look at the impact of decisions made since then, and also we'll try and offset that with if there's capacity to budget for higher interest, we will do that now that we know where the economy is at now. Because the idea would be to keep that budget as it's exhibited, but be adjusted. So hopefully that answers council's question. That was another question.
I was actually going to ask a question as well. When you're talking about calculating the return on those floating rate notices, are most of those floating rate notices paying a monthly distribution or quarterly or yearly distribution?
They vary, and that's what I need to unpack exactly because, there will be a way to calculate it exactly, but it's just the balance of the cost effectiveness of that process to get the number accurate versus the time it takes to calculate certain things. So, but we are looking at it. But certainly term deposits are relatively straightforward to calculate what income is going to be attributable to this financial year because it's known.
Councillor Eaton, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you. So how much is our total interest budget? I'm just trying to figure out what the actual variation is.
So the interest line, we had a full year budget of 29 million on a consolidated basis. In that line, there's two components. One is the interest earned on the actual investments. There's also the interest charge for overdue rates and charges, and we've also had a significant variation in that income. That's a little bit more, even more challenging to estimate in terms of trying to estimate how many people are not going to pay on time or have arrangements and the interest accruing on that. But certainly, when we do budgets year on year, we do look at the previous years and we try and not have the same gaps if we can avoid them. So yeah, so that's the total.
I mean, that's huge. That's a third. Yeah. I mean, fortunately, it's the right way, but that's a huge budget error.
Yeah, the big part, as I said, it's the amount, the assumption that everything's going to be spent. So council has.
Well, can I interrupt you on that? Because I mean, council's never spent in my previous history. You never spent 100% of your capital budget, and I think the target is 90%. So I don't understand why you'd be forecasting you would spend 100% when the target's 90.
That's a fair comment. We have to better plan for interest. We have actually just engaged someone to help us with a strategy to look at our cash flow. The cash flow, again, there is an assumption. It's difficult for us to budget not to deliver the operational plan. But certainly, if we want to start doing that, there is certainly that is a small risk that we can take based on history, I suppose, which is it's a fair point that history has shown that we haven't spent everything. And as long as that assumption is well understood. But what's happened this year, I suppose, that end of year adjustment, it's about 8 million. It's a big contributor to the variation, and that's just the way we did have a change in accounting in how we project things monthly, and with the interest income, we'll need to improve that for future years. But it is a big variation. So much that.
Thank you.
Councillor McMurray.
Usually we get told about this time how much operating expenditure we haven't expended on staff. Employee costs, you've got $3 million increase in expenditure there at the moment. Is there any portion of that you're still looking at the staff costs being reduced?
Yeah, so at the moment, the way the quarterly review has been done is in terms of employee costs, bearing in mind that employee costs includes not just salaries and wages, there's super things like workers' comp, for example. There is a big adjustment for workers' compensation, which is in the report, which has affected some of that adjustment, but there's only a proposed minor reduction of 270,000 against employee costs. We do actively monitor the vacancy assumption, so we do allow for a vacancy saving, and that is tracking favourably at this stage. That amount has not been harvested, if you like. However, again, that's just what we have done. We felt it's appropriate, and with materials and services, there's actually an increase of 4.8, and then some of that related to grants, and also there's a big adjustment there for legal expenses, for example. So no, the short answer, I suppose, is there hasn't been a physical budget reduction in employee costs. Yeah, but overall, So the way we looked at Q3 is the result where we are at, and essentially the projected surplus, taking everything into account, is 24.5 million, excluding water and sewer. If we can go to the next slide. So when we just look at water and sewer, I've created that.
We figured you didn't want a picture of sewer.
I'm not that clever.
Not brown.
So essentially, water and sewer, we before Q3, we had a budgeted surplus of 6.3 million. We have had an increase in operating revenue. That's interest predominantly as well. So the interest income affects all our cash. So in the water and sewer, there has been a lot of some big projects where the cash expenditure, so the Mardi treatment plant, for example, we've borrowed money, but expenditure has been slower. So that money is now earning us interest. So as I said, a lot of things go into it, and there has been a decrease in operating expenditure. I think $500,000 of that is actually depreciation, which again, we adjusted reported based on projection. So this surplus is not available to be spent on anything else. It will just essentially stay in the water and sewer restrictions if unspent. So it doesn't go anywhere. But obviously with water and sewer, the next year is the last year of the determination. So we just need to make sure that all up after the end of next year that we have delivered. If you can go to the next. Is there any questions on water and sewer?
Question. You mentioned Marty, the 40 million loan. Got a time to pay that back yet, or is it? You said you got some money in there now.
It's all fully drawn at the moment. Yeah. So once it's drawn and invested and unspent, we invested. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing, for example, that we wouldn't have planned. That we would draw the money. Just the way it worked out with the delays on the project, which were outside of council's control. So yeah, it's fully drawn. Right. So obviously there's hundreds of lines, reallocations and things like that behind the scenes. But just pulling out things where outcomes are somewhat impacted. So we have reduced the events budget due to the delay in the finalization of the draft event strategy, 100,000. So just pointing out there's no impact on the actual events. We still delivered or will be delivering what we plan to deliver, but this strategy has got actions in there around doing things better, like better marketing and enhancing events and things like that. So there is no impact on actually what we're going to deliver, but there's a delay, I suppose, in improving what we do. So that event strategy is still with staff. In progress. We did some adjustment within the town centre cleaning budget. So essentially, when we did the budget, at the time of the budget, we knew that the contract was going to come up for renewal. Wherever there's a contract coming up for renewal, we do allow for an increase because generally we don't secure the condition I had had. But with this one, the contract actually came back, I believe, cheaper. So we were able to reduce that budget, but no impact on the actual cleaning. On the opposite side, the security costs, we've had to increase them. And again, that is something that really we're not going to go and reduce security. So we were able to offset that. So there's a few of those things that happen in Q3s where we try and resolve any adverse things with other things. So there's no bottom line impact. We have reduced the budgets for decorative street lighting and replacement of LED lights due to vendor delays. This work has been budgeted in 25-26. So when we're preparing the budget, when we know those things, we would plan, and this is a good example where we knew there were delays, so we did put it in next year's budget. So essentially this money can be given up this year, outcome next year. And we were able to decrease consultant budget for the integrated transport strategy as now being undertaken by transport. So strategy is still happening, but we're able to save 0.2 million. Obviously, these are very high level. What's the next slide? Okay, so again, very high level, probably two big cost items on the left that we have had to increase the budget for is legal expenses due to higher than anticipated litigated matters. So that's around 700,000, and an increase in the cost of workers' compensation, just under £1 million. Both those two areas are quite challenging in terms of knowing exactly what it's going to cost. So there's risk involved in the budget for those things, because we don't want to unnecessarily allocate a high level just to sit there. But when we have to pay those for those things, there's no discretion. So and again, they can both fluctuate because they're both things that can vary. So a lot of the litigated matters are from the planning area when people take us to court because they don't like the they want to dispute the outcome. And the workers' compensation claims is around the medical costs associated with that. It's just higher than it's been in previous years.
Councillor,
I was going to say, I just saw that. Councillor Eaton, you have a question?
Yes, the legal expenses. I see that. Did I see there was also a significant increase in consultants' costs?
legal
You said, is there also a significant increase in legal costs for
No,
consultants?
consultants. And is
That-
that related to the legal expenses? I suppose
Yeah,
the question I'm really asking. I don't know. Oh, sorry. I don't know why. Hang on, I've turned off the camera.
Yes, you did.
To
That's okay.
Mr. Chair, so the adjustment that we are talking about there is not consultants.
He's broken up.
Sorry, Councillor Eaton, you're cutting in. Councillor Eaton, may I suggest that you text me your question and they can answer on your behalf? While we wait for that.
Finished answering that or?
Well, in terms of whether it's consultants, because that line is purely legal costs, not consultants. So it's where we engage lawyers to undertake cases. So consultant is actually a separate line. So if we're using a specific consultant for that, it's a separate line.
You're saying that
Okay.
external.
I think I'm back. Yeah, so really what I'm wondering is when we have town planning consultants and ecologists and all those sort of contractors as part of our
Councillor Eaton, you're cutting out again. Councillor Eaton, is it possible for you to SMS me your question? I'll ask the director.
You got
Text him and ask him to text him. Because his signals obviously.
Yeah.
With the compo.
Yeah.
Yes, so with legal costs, I probably have to go back and unpack exactly where the changes are, but just noting that lawyers will use lots of consultants and then they would pass on those costs to us. So in terms of legal costs, then we treat them as a contract unless we've engaged the consultants ourselves. But I'm happy to go in and find out exactly how we're tracking, because we do have separate lines for consultants that support the legal that we engage directly.
And Councillor Graham.
With the workers' compensation increases, are we seeing a rise in mental health or physical health? What's behind that, if there's any information on that?
Yeah, it's the psychological.
Through the chair, we've actually had less injuries this financial year than at the same period last financial year, but by their nature, some of those injuries are more expensive. So there are some increases in the psychological space, but in this particular matter, there was a physical injury that required surgery, and a large component of that, I can't tell you what it is off the top of my head, but a decent chunk of that was actual medical costs.
We're talking about like a small amount of people, small number of people with very complex issues, or are we talking about a large number of people with less complex issues that cover that?
There's a little bit of both. So the vast majority of our injuries are very small, cuts, sprains, bruises and the like, but there are a small number of complex matters that contribute significantly to some of the costs.
So to go back to, sorry, Councillor McGregor, do you have anything else? Councillor McGregor, Councillor Eaton's question, sorry, was just around noting that there's an increase in legal expenses. Has there been an increase in consulting expenses as well for town planners, ecologists and the like?
Yeah, I'm ready to take it on notice.
Perfect. I will note it to Councillor Eaton to that effect.
We'll respond in the workshop next week.
Perfect.
A question also about the legal. Does the line items in the budget for legal separate out the costs for the Land and Environment Court actions?
They're case by case.
So
We do case by case.
So if we said, can you tell me how much the Land and Environment Court cost us this year? You would be able to tell us because they're out case by case. Thank you.
Is there any further slides?
No, just on the right-hand side is where we've increased the budgets as well, but with very specific actions. So again, as part of Q3, we want to make sure that that we complete as much as we can, we deliver as much as we can the outcomes that we're going to deliver. So as we mentioned earlier, there is additional money allocated for roadside vegetation management. There's additional money there to do more heavy patching. There's an increase in line marking for roads west of the M1. We will be trialling AI technology for road pavement defect detection. So when we attach the cameras to some vehicles, we've allocated money for the digital transformation strategy, noting it's a staged implementation. So that 1.5 is part of that. And we're also able to allocate some extra money to bring forward some additional holiday parks, amenities, maintenance, things more around tree cutting and so I think that was it.
You had a question?
The digital transformation strategy, what exactly is that? What are we transforming digitally? Like, what's it look like in reality?
So council has over the last year started developing a digital strategy moving forward. We're investigating a number of different options and it's a 4-stage process. Once we've landed that, we'll bring that to council. This particular amount of money is for some early investment in hardware. So it's investment in hardware that's coming to end of life next financial year that we've been able to bring forward and commence the procurement process for. That's specifically what that particular component is. If your question's more about digital transformation more broadly, we're looking at most of the IT infrastructure and software purchased by this organisation was done so at amalgamation. And so all of that is nearing its end of useful life. We're currently investigating our path forward for whether we continue with a best in breed model or look at an integrated council solution. We've commenced those investigations and sped those up mostly. One, because we need to do it, and two, because with the volatility in the international market and a lot of those software licenses being based in America, changes to the dollar makes an impact on our purchasing power in that respect, but also to support council's priorities in terms of better customer experience, increased productivity and efficiency, and also responding to the changes in technology available, particularly in the space of AI. So reviewing all of those core processes together and looking at ways that we can deliver those outcomes in a really streamlined way. And that's the focus of that strategy. It is on the agenda to talk to council about next week in a lot more detail as well.
Thank you.
I didn't have a slide on capital works, but probably worth noting that there was there's no adjustment proposed to the total capital expenditure budget for this financial year. But there are obviously changes to individual projects. So there's all the details in the attachments to the report. So those changes, some of them are because of changes when we went to tender, some scope change, timing, especially around grant funded projects where we're working with funding agencies with some complex projects. And there is also in there some money allocation for IT as well as capital in nature for urgent replacement of some infrastructure. Yeah, that's pretty much summary of the capital works.
Perfect. Did you have any other information you wish to share?
Just with the interest, sorry, just backtracking a little bit as well. So in previous years, the end of kind of year adjustment, we tended to leave, not deal with it until the end. In Q3, I've brought that in as well. So it's, I suppose, the interest estimate is the maximum it needs to be at. So just probably tonight.
Okay. Councillor McMurray.
My favourite subject is debt. You haven't given us anything on debt at all?
Yeah, there's nothing. I mean, with that, essentially in the in terms of the interest, which impacts the operating result, there's no adjustment there in terms of paying back debt. So we're on track to repay in full without refinancing the second emergency loan in November. It's not worth repaying that loan due to the low interest rate that we're paying on it. So essentially there is no change. That's why the report is silent on it. There's no budget adjustment that we need to make around that. We're on track.
So I think the last one we've seen was the general fund, approximately 20 million, with about 6 million from storm water. Something was included in that 20 million. If you take that out, the general fund still has the debt of about 12 million.
Yeah.
So we're doing nothing with the general fund specific debt. At the moment, it's still sitting at about 12 million.
Yeah, so there was quite a fair bit of work done on that to look at. So a lot of those loans are very old and spread over many little loans. And when we looked at the cost of repaying those loans, by the time you take into account the break costs, it was not cost effective to do it. It's a very, I know we don't like having loans, but it is a very small amount. Like there's a ratio, a debt capacity ratio there that we're well within. So, I mean, obviously it is, if council wanted to look at repaying that debt, the cash capacity is there to do that. However, it would come at a cost. May cost effective, but yeah, so we have looked at it. So whether it's cost, yeah, it's a lot of work to administer those loans. So, there was an incentive for us to try and see if we can do without them.
Understand the cost, but I hate that. So over to the chair.
Thank you. Any further information you'd like to share, Ms. Clare?
No, not from my side. I think that the report provides a summary and there's quite a fair bit of detail in there.
And I appreciate we're going through it week after next as well. Did any other staff wish to make a presentation? Is that on a separate item?
No further presentations, just available.
Perfect. Any further questions from the floor? That being the case, do we have a motion to move the recommendation or otherwise?
Yeah, I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Eaton. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor McGregor. All those in favour? I note that's unanimous. Now move on to item 1.7, the draft councillor expenses and facilities policy for adoption. Councillor Eaton, I believe you had a question on this agenda item.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to relevant staff. It occurred to me that whether we could make a minor amendment along the lines of not requiring a receipt for small items of maybe under $10 or $15. And by way of explanation, as many councillors did, well, I know Councillor McGregor did as well as myself, and I think Councillor McNamara, we had those meet the residents forums on Saturday, and I bought a cup of coffee, as did Councillor Merland, for instance, and obviously I didn't bother to get a receipt, but you know, it seemed to me that that was probably a legitimate expense. I'm not that fussed about it, but you know, the record keeping involved in those small items is not worth the exercise. So I wondered whether we could make a minor amendment saying no receipt for items under whatever is a reasonable amount.
Director, would you wish to provide any commentary on that?
Thank you. Through the chair. Thank you, Councillor Eden. We just need to look into the rules and procedures around that. And I'd be happy to take that on notice and get back to you next week to enable that amendment to be made on the council floor if required.
Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect. Councillor Eden, did you have any other questions you'd like to raise?
No. So I'll move the recommendation. That was the only one I had.
Just before you move that, I might just provide the opportunity for any other councillors to ask a question. Perfect. All right. Do we want to move the recommendation? Councillor Eaton's moved it. Do we have a seconder? Councillor McGregor. All those in favour? Unanimous. We now move on to item 1.9, the review procurement policy for adoption. Do I have any questions from the floor that they wish to ask? Councillor McGregor.
The first question is in the report, and I haven't read it in detail and gone over it and all that sort of stuff, but page 181, it talks about from July 1st July 2022 to 28th of February, how much council spent with locals, etc., etc. Do we have any data before then? Is that just when we started collecting data, or is there a particular reason why we chose those dates?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I might just introduce Michael Ross, who is our Unit Manager of Procurement and Project Management, who's the appropriate person to answer this question.
Through the chair. From that period, it's the time we started to collect some reasonable data post-COVID, post different things. So the policy was implemented by the former council. Just a true period that we could get some decent data to do analytics on and understand the impact of the policy so that we could use that for our recommendation moving.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the former Gosford. I know the former Wyong had a local procurement policy, and obviously the local procurement policy adopted by the last democratically elected council was something I took a particular interest in. Did we do any comparison to either what former Wyong had or neighbouring councils as well when we looked at that 22 to 25 data?
Yeah, through the chair. Yeah, look, we did a lot of reaching out and dealing with other councils, local councils, regional councils, inner city councils, talking to suppliers locally, suppliers outside of our local area as well to understand impacts, thought process that goes into submitting tenders when you've got a local preference policy. As far as councils, neighbouring councils, regional councils, it's fairly hit and miss, to be honest, as far as what people do. There's not really, I think generally there's a preference towards local suppliers, provided there's no cost impact to council. It's what's pretty common. But as far as the application of it in a city, it's not as common because obviously their borders are smaller, so they can't realistically source things within those borders. As you get to regional and you've got the larger borders, there's more opportunity naturally for that spend to fall within the LGA. Yeah. So I found once we look at regional, there tends to be it's more focused, but it's not actively tracked generally as much as, or probably as well as we have been.
And then the other thing I was curious about was the, where you mentioned the stakeholders or any consultation. Did you want to provide any information about that or any summary of what sort of went into talking to local businesses or people in the community about it, how you did that?
Yeah, through the chair. Something I was particularly interested in was the impact to suppliers outside of the local area and what their thought process is, and if it's consideration when they tender for our works, incorporating local suppliers, local subcontractors, in providing the goods to us, and just got confirmation on that. That was a massive factor when they prepare a bid or a tender, to try to make sure they source as much as they can locally, if it's something that we actually evaluate or consider in tenders.
Yeah.
Because that's where we see there's a big impact. Obviously awarding the work to our local suppliers, but also the local supply content of tenders that are outside of our local area, which is just another contributing factor economically within the LGA.
Yeah, and then I'm obviously quite supportive of the policy and everything, but I'm curious, and this may be beyond your role, but how do we promote this? Because I think this is a really positive thing that council does, and it has a huge impact on our region. And we know that business is often not very thankful for all the great things the government does for them, but how are we out there promoting this to people?
Look, we're actually running a supplier session on the 12th of June, where we're bringing suppliers in to sort of work with our local suppliers or any suppliers so that they can understand and increase their likelihood of success of winning tenders with council, understand how we operate from local preference policy, also bringing local government procurement in so that they can understand how they can tender for and become part of panels and actually grow their business outside of our LGA as well. So we've got the procurement policy that's obviously advertised, but that's probably the primary factors or primary drivers that we use to promote.
And the very last one, because I don't want to monopolise it, but the anti-slavery component, I'm not familiar with that. Have we had to knock anyone back because of that, or is that something which has had a big impact on it, or is that more of one of those things where it's, you know, legislative requirement or regulatory requirement, you've got to put it in, but you're not finding it's having a huge impact on the...
Look, it's to a degree, it's definitely evolving, I suppose, with the introduction of the legislation and then the guidance of regional stats that were released to inform, I suppose, the application of the legislation. So for us, it starts with doing a risk assessment of our supply base to understand where our risk is, and then putting steps in place to manage that. So our risk areas are cleaning, security, plant fleet, IT, things like that. But we haven't, Danny Andrews could probably, but to my understanding, we haven't really identified any issues where we've had to knock back contractors. We have got provisions within that contract so that we can terminate based on modern slavery. There's a lot of returnable schedules, different things to capture the detail as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Just a follow-on question for that, because for about 2 hours before this meeting, I was saying to the director that I had a question. I forgot what it was. It actually was about that. I completely agree with Councillor McGregor that this is, something we can promote more, and I thank him for raising that. Every now and again, I do get an email from a constituent. I had one the other day who did mulch blowing, and they sort of said, how do I get onto council's lists of, I want to be considered. I'm a local and I want to have a shot at a council tender. Is there information regularly available on the website, or perhaps something you can share with us, or a social media campaign to sort of say, hey, actually council does employ a lot of local people and there's an opportunity, there's an event even, there's an event you can come to and you can listen and hear. Is that promoted? Is that something you'd be able to do?
Yeah. So we've got the event. The event's obviously being promoted. On the website, you can actually connect through to make contact with staff.
Yeah.
If you're interested in providing services to council.
Yeah.
Or becoming a registered supplier or pre-qualified supplier for council. So there's opportunity with that. As far as social media or campaigning from that perspective, it's probably not something that we actively do.
Yeah. Is that something
we can take on board?
Could you consider? I mean, could you take it on notice as something to consider for the event? Because I think there'd be a whole heap of local businesses out there, and that might help with the local procurement policy, right? More people at the table to have potential shot at a tender.
Yeah, I think this is yes, most certainly, and we will be doing those things to promote the event.
Okay.
It's our first event, so it's an inaugural event for council. I think this event will nail, and we're hopeful that it's going to be successful. And I think as we move forward in future years, though, it'll grow, and we've got visions for what it will look like.
Will councillors be invited to that event?
I'm working on that at the moment to get to the guys. Yeah.
I can appreciate that might be a sensitive area, but
Oh, it's not sensitive. But we have got we're using council facilities as well. So as far as space and but we're just waiting on the minor detail.
sure. Councillor Eaton, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think how to phrase this. So maybe by telling a complaint or suggestion I received at some function I was at, where a relatively small architectural firm said they were effectively blocked out from bidding for council contracts for things like toilets because they only have a $10 million public liability policy and council requires 20. And I'm just wondering what other sort of basically non-financial barriers we are putting up, that actually preclude people from making a bid for a contract.
Through the chair, not aware of the particular example or specifics of the example, but we generally have standard terms. The standard terms can be considered from certain instances. It's $20 million public liability, but we also, with an architectural firm, it would be professional indemnity would be another consideration. So I suppose it's the specifics of that we'd have to understand to.
Yes, in this case, he was talking about, something like a toilet block where you're talking about a $50,000 build. There's not, and they're only doing the design work, of course. It seemed like a fair point to me. And I'm aware in the past that, there are, things that some small business in general finds it very difficult to comply with big business / council rules and regulations. Maybe we could get a copy of what are the standard terms and conditions brought to maybe the next meeting. I don't think it's particularly urgent or distributed, Mr. Chair.
We can distribute.
We can distribute, I think. Yeah.
I think through the chair, that's a big focus for the 12th of June and moving forward as we continue these initiatives with our supplier base, with understanding that the barriers suppliers face, but also trying to help work with the suppliers so that we can help them be successful in bids for council and work for council, and to support council and us support our supplier base as well.
Sure. And in the end, we probably get on balance slightly contracts by using local smaller businesses. So, it's a win-win.
Perfect. Do any other councillors have any questions?
Yes.
Councillor McNamara.
I think I got this information from a councillor newsletter. So you can fact check this one. So for any contracts under $150,000, the weighting for local companies is 20%. Is that correct?
No. It's so for tenders, it's
For tenders.
the weighting is 20% to a cap of $150,000 financial impact.
Financial impact,
Yeah,
not the cost of the tender.
That's the maximum impact.
Okay.
The consideration of local content.
Can you explain that a bit further, please?
Yeah.
So if we have,
Because I read that.
this is hard.
When I read that, it sounded like we're giving people a $150,000 discount because they were local.
No, what it is so what we do is we provide a returnable schedule with all the tenders, and every tender, regardless if they're local in the LGA outside, they have to actually list the local content. So it could be concrete, concreters, builders, Bunnings, any of those sort of suppliers, and the value of that. The value of that is captured and aggregated and then put into the evaluation and given a percentage weighting to a maximum impact on the outcome of $150,000.
Okay, so, yeah, okay, I understand.
The wording of it may be better explained. And I think another point in that newsletter said there was approximately $200 million a year that we procure from local businesses.
Yeah, certainly. Our spend is currently tracking between $400 to $500 million per year purchase order, and we're probably between 45 and 50% local content, excluding, or that's including the spend with government and other spend that we can't source locally. When we take into consideration or exclude that, it pushes it up to sort of in the 50 to 55% local spend, which is it's
Approximately the 200,000.
200 to 250 million.
To Councillor Wright's point, that's a great story that you know, the council are buying approximately $200,000 from local companies. And that would be a good post somebody could put up.
Through the chair, it's 200 million.
200.
Make sure you tell them where the policy came from originally too. Council and friends can all give me a big pat on the back.
Okay.
Any other questions on the matter? Do I have a motion?
The staff recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
Yeah, second.
I'll give it to Councillor Crowley. She got in just before you, Councillor Eaton. Second by
Okay.
Councillor Crowley. We now move on to the final item of the evening, which is item 1.10, the Northern Boca Surf Lifesaving Club approval to issue lead and license. Do I have any questions?
Yeah, my question was, I thought last council meeting we gave under delegation the authority to negotiate all leases up to $10 million. So is this coming to the committee because it doesn't match up with that, or before or after? What's to go with that?
Chair, my understanding is anything over 10 years needs to come to council for approval, and this lease is 20 years.
Okay, so that's the time.
Before I move to other questions, just a procedural matter, we didn't vote on the former item. Just can I get all those in favour raising their hand, please? Noting that is unanimous. All of you civic support. Councillor Gregg, do you have any further questions?
And this is going to go to full council anyway, isn't it?
Yes.
This is just to send it through to it.
Okay. Any further questions on this matter? Do I have a motion?
Well, it was just to send it to full council. I'll move that. Sure.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Eaton, thank you very much. Yes, I was just thinking if there's anything else on that item. So voting on that matter, all those in favour, can they please raise their hands? Unanimous. Okay. I will close the meeting at 8:24 p.m. I thank everyone for the participation and look forward to many more hearings in the future.
The expenses.
Council expense cup of coffee. It's like what?
The answer to the question asked is unfortunately we can't do anything without a receipt. So there is
Fair enough.
specific question says.
Can council actually expense a cup of coffee in a minute?